How do you bury a marriage, a legacy, and a reputation all at once without ever filing the paperwork? Ask Remy Ma. No press release, no tearful interview, no quiet exit stage left. Bar by bar, shot by shot, freestyle by freestyle over a single explosive week. In late 2025, the internet officially crowned Remy the loudest voice in the entire Papoose Claressa circus. The third chapter in a story nobody thought would get this dramatic. But the real story isn't the diss track. It's how she got to a place where burning it all down felt like the only option left, while everybody else kept pretending the marriage was still standing. Reminisce Smith, better known to the streets and the studio as Remy Ma, was born May 30th in the Castle Hill projects of the Bronx, New York. Her beginnings weren't glamorous. Her household was heavy. Her come-up was brutal. From the jump, she was exceptional. She was rhyming in hallways before she had her first publishing deal. She joined Fat Joe's Terror Squad as the only woman in the room and proceeded to outwork every man standing next to her. Pun used to bless the verse. Remy kept the bar alive. She wasn't a feature, she was the foundation. And then came Papoose, a Brooklyn lyricist with mixtape respect, a relentless grind, and a deep fascination with the woman everybody in the 5 boroughs was talking about. He chased her through letters, he chased her through prison visits, he chased her through a 6-year bid that should have ended the entire fairy tale. But from the very beginning, Remy was already paying attention to the business of loyalty, not just the sound of it. She noticed who showed up. She noticed who stayed. She noticed who wrote to her when the lights went off. And she gave Papoose something most rappers never receive, a front row seat to a queen's rebuild. Their story became the blueprint. The prison wedding, the Love Jones that refused to quit, the reality show, the matching denim, the co-parenting after every storm. Hip-hop hadn't seen a couple like that since the culture itself started tracking couples. But here's what most people never noticed during those years. Remy was already watching the math. She watched how Papoose built his brand around hers. She watched how the narrative kept framing him as the loyal husband holding the crown steady for his incarcerated queen. She watched her name become his calling card. At the peak of Love and Hip Hop and the Golden Era podcast run, Papoose's visibility was tied almost entirely to one woman. Remy's share of the spotlight, roughly 90% of the oxygen inside the marriage's brand. Most artists in her position would have let it slide forever. Remy filed it under observation, and she started reading the fine print on every sentence that followed her name. But before Remy could walk into this new season as herself, she had to survive the collapse of the man who was supposed to ride forever. Papoose had the resume of a loyal soldier. He had the tattoos, he had the interviews, he had the catchphrases about his wife being his everything. He had a whole chapter in his brand titled Devotion. But as the marriage quietly drifted, something slowly began leaking into the public. Rumors that the relationship had ended long before anyone was willing to announce it. Whispers that a new woman had been in the picture longer than either side admitted on camera. Signs that certain events from 2024 were much older in the timeline than the internet initially realized. In the final weeks of that year, the entire puzzle snapped into place with a sound you could almost hear through the phone screen. Papoose was photographed arm in arm with Claressa Shields, the undefeated boxing champion, walking into rooms as if he had never once worn a wedding band. The captions were loud. The energy was louder. Most women would have been erased by that single moment, chewed up by the blog cycle, buried under a hashtag. Remy used it as lighter fluid instead. She stopped pretending. She stopped.
Remy moved completely different. She held roughly 70% of the audience's sympathy on lock, while the other side scrambled to secure even 20%. That single positioning, carefully carved out during the quietest months of the year, compounded into a tidal wave of public goodwill that detonated the exact moment she finally opened her mouth. It was almost too clean, almost too deliberate. Then came the decision that rewired the whole temperature of the room. She picked up the pen. Not for a reality show spinoff, not for a soft focus R&B comeback record, not for a sit-down with the usual podcasters. For a freestyle. Raw, unfiltered, engineered for targeted damage from the first breath to the last syllable. Remy didn't respond to Claressa. Remy did not defend herself against Papoose. Remy became the verdict. Here's why that freestyle changed everything, and why most casual fans don't fully understand how strategic it was. In traditional celebrity beefs, the wronged woman goes on a podcast, cries a little, throws one vague subliminal, and lets the algorithm take it from there. She gives away the narrative to every blog, every reaction channel, every messy cousin with a microphone. Remy flipped that entire template. She self-produced the response. She controlled the track. She controlled the rollout. She consistently captured a larger share of the conversation than any other woman in a similar public breakup. Think about it this way. A traditional scorned wife in a 500 million eyeball news cycle might win 10 million stands. Remy stepped into a 500 million eyeball news cycle and walked out with 300 million heads nodding. The first rollout, teased on her page, previewed on her podcast, finalized on the freestyle, attracted wall-to-wall coverage across every major urban outlet. That single moment reframed her from scorned ex to living weapon. Then came the second wave, the interview clips, the receipts, the DM screenshots, the quiet quote tweets, the strategically timed silences. 2 rollouts, 4 weeks, a complete narrative takeover. That's not a beef, that's a brand campaign disguised as payback. But here's what the casual viewer keeps missing about this entire saga: the catalog. Since day one, Remy has owned her voice in a way almost no other female rapper from her era managed to protect. Every bar she recorded in the last decade, she wrote herself, she delivered herself, she defended herself. That is incredibly uncommon. Most artists in a public split suddenly discover their old hits were co-written by the ex, credited to the ex, cashed in by the ex. Papoose famously suggested across multiple interviews that he helped shape certain records, certain hooks, certain career-defining moments. Remy looked the camera in the eye and reminded the room that her pen had never needed a co-signer. Her archive, years of mixtapes, verses streamed across every platform, features that print royalties every quarter, is valued at a level that appreciates every single time a new generation presses play. Industry insiders quietly note that most of her recent leverage comes from controlling the vault of her own receipts. It isn't nostalgia, it's an asset that grows every time someone tries to rewrite her story. While other exes were losing the narrative, Remy was building the library. In mid-2025, Remy did something nobody in the Papoose chapter of hip-hop ever expected her to do. No teaser, no interview sit-down, no carefully worded statement run through a publicist. She just dropped the freestyle. A weaponized verse, a viral clip, a cultural incident, all at once. While the average response record might rack up maybe 2 million streams with a mild lump in engagement, Remy's model detonated entirely differently. The freestyle dropped first on her own platforms, exclusively for her own audience, routed through a podcast ecosystem she had already cultivated for years. The snippets crossed over into the reaction economy within hours. Merch energy, shirts, memes, catchphrases launched organically the same day. Total cultural revenue from the freestyle cycle, rough estimate, well over 100 million impressions within a week. From a track to cost her almost nothing to produce. A traditional diss would have generated a 2-day cycle. Remy's rollout produced a full quarter of dominance. Same woman, same grievances, completely different outcome. Because she owned the delivery, she owned the timing, and she owned the receipts. The culture had never seen a breakup handled with this much precision, and it became the template for how she intends to close every chapter from this point forward.
There is one more detail that almost nobody has stopped to appreciate, and it matters more than any single line in the freestyle. Remy never once begged for the title of wife. She never once marketed the marriage as a product. She never sold pieces of it in exchange for magazine covers. She protected it. She carried it. She lived inside it with the same quiet intensity she brought to her verses. So when the marriage started leaking into public view through other people's captions, the betrayal did not only belong to the relationship, it belonged to the decade of discipline she had poured into keeping it private. That is why this particular chapter cuts deeper than the average rap breakup. The audience is not just watching a couple fall apart. They are watching a woman's decade of restraint finally reach its detonation point. And when a person with that much stored restraint finally decides to speak, the first sentence hits like a freight train, and the second sentence hits like a door being kicked in. Let's step inside the bars themselves. Remy didn't merely vent, she engineered humiliation. She opened by framing Claressa as a costume thief, a woman who allegedly studied her style, slid into her DMs for fashion cues, and then showed up on red carpets looking like a photocopied remix of the original. She accused her of competing with herself. She accused her of using the word baddie while failing every test the word required. And then she twisted the blade. She implied, plainly, without decoration, that personal insecurity was the engine behind every copycat outfit and every camera-ready smile. There was no gasp for air in the record. There was no polite pause. Every line was a pressure point. Then, mid-verse, she pivoted. She aimed the second half of the track at Papoose. She dismantled the idea that he had ghostwritten a single word of her career. She reminded the audience that he had never ghostwritten for anyone else either. She suggested that the man who kept announcing how much he helped her might want to consider helping himself. She said it without shouting. That was the part that traveled fastest. The quiet version of contempt always cuts deeper than the loud one. But Remy didn't stop at music. She built an entire ecosystem around the response. There's the podcast, the same studio where she controls the tone of every clip that leaks. There's the fashion footprint, limited drops, stylist partnerships, streetwear cosigns that kept her face on every timeline. There's the live appearances, the strategic red carpets, the unfiltered radio drop-ins. In between albums when most artists go dark, Remy stayed loud with a purpose. Then came the receipts era. Screenshots, voice notes, phone logs, not dumped recklessly, but released in a rhythm that felt almost musical. Drop one, breathe, drop another. Her timing was cinematic. And then most recently, she leaned on her hardest card, the fact that she and Papoose are still legally, technically, paperwork verified, married. A detail that turned every outside reaction into an uninvited cousin at somebody else's cookout. Podcast, fashion, receipts, marriage certificate, freestyle. Remy didn't just clap back. She colonized every conversation that even whispered her name. And then somewhere inside that same storm, Papoose and Claressa made a move that only poured more kerosene.
They went public, loud, pictured, coupled up, matching fits, event after event. A relationship that insiders insist had been running quietly since at least August of the prior year finally stepped into daylight the moment Remy's name started trending. Claressa didn't whisper it, she announced it. She walked, posed, captioned, and interviewed like the upgrade had already been ratified by the culture. She even floated the idea of handling the disagreement the way she handles everything else, inside a ring, under lights, on pay-per-view. To most exes, that would read as a threat. To Remy, it read as a marketing opportunity she didn't have to pay for. Meanwhile, Papoose stayed suspiciously quiet whenever Claressa did the talking, only emerging to post the occasional warning shot on his own page, short captions hinting that he had things he could reveal if the conversation kept drifting past his comfort zone. The couple framed themselves as the next chapter. Remy framed them as the cautionary tale. And then came the confirmation that made everything real. The freestyle didn't just perform well, it performed like a cultural event. Every major platform picked up the clip within 24 hours. Every reaction channel weighed in within 48. The line, "You want to be a baddie but you ain't bad enough," hit the Explore page faster than most label singles hit streaming. The other line, "We want accusing her rival of ugliness wrapped in a punchline," trended across timelines that usually ignore rap feuds entirely. She joins a small, almost mythic circle of female rappers who managed to hijack an entire news cycle without a label rollout, a radio spin, or a paid placement. But here's what separates her from every other scorned rapper's wife in hip-hop history.
She didn't need a mogul cosign. She didn't need a late-night talk show apology tour. She didn't need a tearful confessional. She reached that viral peak the long way, bar by bar, clip by clip, over years of watching everybody around her sign the wrong paperwork emotionally and professionally. And with her reputation in the studio still operating at full voltage, her cultural stock sitting higher than it has in nearly a decade, her position in the room is unusual. The rap ex who refused to be a footnote. Not bad for a girl from Castle Hill, who was once told her career could not survive a prison sentence. Most women in her position spend their post-marriage years auditioning for other people's narratives. The label owns the feature, the promoter owns the appearance fee, the manager takes his cut, the brand pays for a photo and keeps the equity. At the end of it all, the ex-wife becomes a caption on somebody else's vacation post. Renee watched that pattern chew up women around her for an entire generation, and she made one choice that rewrote her script. She refused to be a supporting character in her own separation. She owned the microphone, she owned the beat, she owned the story, she owned the silence between the lines, she owned the receipts. Most people think Remy is winning this cycle because she's petty. Petty had nothing to do with it. There are hundreds of petty celebrities who will never grip a news cycle the way she gripped this one. Remy is winning because she understood something almost nobody in celebrity drama ever does. The shouting is just the marketing. The ownership of the narrative is the actual business. And this time she owned everything. Here's the twist that is beginning to separate this chapter from every other rap breakup of the last 20 years. Papoose might be done with Remy in conversation, but Remy is very clearly not done with him in the booth. Sources close to the camp say Papoose is not taking the freestyle quietly, especially after he and Remy allegedly agreed during a brief holiday reset to leave each other out of public smoke. That handshake, according to every insider in the building, has now officially been incinerated. Word is he's already recording his own response. Word is the track will go further than a diss. It may include names, dates, text messages, and ownership claims. Word is he believes Remy swung first and owes him a reply. And on the other side, word is Remy is completely unbothered, already logging studio hours, already plotting round 2. The internet hasn't agreed on a single thing this year, except that this is the feud that refuses to close. A lot of fans believe a legally married couple should have kept this behind closed doors. A louder group believes the door was kicked open the day Claressa decided to use the marriage as a caption strategy. Both groups agree on one thing: nobody has their phone off until the next verse drops. And Claressa, she has played this entire cycle like a pay-per-view headliner walking to the octagon. She's not back down, she's not apologizing, she's not softening her tone. Every time Remy releases something, Claressa posts a workout, a shoot, a laugh, a title defense, a reminder that she is a living weapon in a different arena. Her team insists she owes the estranged wife exactly nothing. Other insiders whisper that she considers Remy's presence in the conversation a free publicity subsidy for her boxing brand. And in a strange way, both sides are telling the truth. Claressa is the only undefeated figure in the entire saga statistically. Remy is the only undefeated figure in the entire saga culturally. And Papoose, somewhere in the narrow middle lane between them, is the man trying to convince the audience that he wrote the verses for a woman who has now publicly revoked his entire narrative on record, in public, in front of millions with a smirk. That is not a comfortable place to stand in late 2025. That is the smallest, coldest square footage in hip-hop. Every move he makes from here will be compared to the last move Remy made, and the last move Remy made was a headshot. He cannot out-rap her without reminding the world that she taught him the lane. He cannot out-silence her without looking guilty. He cannot out-brand her without walking straight into the ring Claressa is already standing in. Every exit he tries leads back to the same door, and Remy is the one holding the key.
And underneath all of this, something subtler is happening, the thing nobody is saying out loud yet. Remy is slowly writing the rulebook for how women in hip-hop survive betrayal. For decades, the template was predictable. The wife cries, the husband pivots to a younger companion, the younger companion collects a reality show deal, the original wife disappears into forum threads and nostalgia playlists. Remy is rejecting every single step of that script. She isn't crying, she isn't pivoting, she isn't disappearing. She is authoring the next movement in real time, and younger women across the culture are taking notes.
Stylists, engineers, managers, radio hosts, and the quiet girls in the group chat are all watching the exact same footage and learning the exact same lesson. The lesson is simple. If you own the story, you do not have to beg for the ending. If you own the microphone, you do not have to negotiate the narrative. If you own the receipts, you do not have to argue with the remix. That is not a beef strategy. That is a life strategy. And Remy, whether she is doing it on purpose or by instinct, is walking every other woman in hip-hop through a masterclass they did not sign up for. So where does this land? Honestly, nowhere soft. The feud has already outgrown the gossip ecosystem. It has crossed over into mainstream sports coverage, thanks to Claressa. It has crossed over into marriage and divorce commentary, thanks to the paperwork nobody has filed. It has crossed over into hip-hop legacy debates, because Remy is now one of the few women of her era still commanding primetime attention without relying on a co-star. The longer Papoose waits to reply, the louder the silence becomes. The longer Claressa stays public, the more ammunition Remy stockpiles. The longer Remy keeps the mic, the more her supporters remind the culture that the original storyline, the prison letters, the loyalty, the long wait, was always hers, not his. This fight doesn't end when somebody drops a better verse. It ends when somebody stops showing up, and not one of these three has shown any sign of doing that. So buckle up. The next chapter is already being written, and based on the pace of the last few weeks, the next chapter will not be quiet, and it will not be short, and it will certainly not be forgiven. Drop your take in the comments below. Tell me who you think is walking out of this story with their name still untouched. Tell me whether you believe Papoose should respond on record or let the silence speak louder than anything he could put on a beat. Tell me whether you think Claressa is the villain, the opportunist, the winner, or all three at once. Tell me if Remy just closed the chapter or if she is the one holding the pen for the entire next book. And if this breakdown connected with you, if you felt even one sentence land the way the culture is feeling it, hit that like, share this with the one friend who has been following the story since the first rumor, subscribe to the channel, turn the notifications on, and stay locked in, because the second this cycle turns again, we are breaking it down bar for bar, move for move, receipt for receipt, silence for silence. See you in the next one, and trust me, the next one is going to be louder, messier, and far more revealing than this.